the Virtually Speaking podcast. My name is Pete Fletcher, and joining me as usual is my good friend, Mr. John Nicholson. John, how you doing, buddy?
Good. It's finally starting to thaw out here. I've just been cooped up. I feel like I just got to go somewhere. So I think I'm just gonna get in my car and go drive a couple hundred miles. Just go to the other side of the state.
Oh,
Seems like the appropriate reaction.
You're gonna migrate your family over somewhere else?
I migrated them here. I'm gonna migrate them back for the weekend. That's kind of the plan.
Yeah.
So look out, Houston.
One of my favorite things to do when we podcast is to just imagine what pun you're going to use for the various episodes, and so I truly enjoy it. I'm sure some people are like, "What?" But yeah, I enjoy it, John. So continue it. We are talking about migrations. We're talking about workload migration specifically to VCF. I saw a great webinar not too long ago by these two gentlemen that are going to join us on this call, and it was very informative. And I thought, man, this would be a good conversation to chew on Virtually Speaking. And so with that, I want to bring these gentlemen on, starting with our friend Mr. Puneet Chawla. Puneet, welcome to Virtually Speaking.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah. And Puneet is not alone. He's also joined by our good friend, Mr. Mike McLaughlin. Mike, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, very good. So, gentlemen, as I mentioned, we were talking all about workload migration. You guys did a really good presentation on that not too long ago, and we talked about HCX, we talked about VMware Live Recovery, which I think is an interesting one, but then also VCF Import. So, good stuff. I want to start. Maybe we can just kick off at a very high level and cover, Puneet, maybe you can start by just talking about the journey, as you will, to VCF Private Cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So this is one of the journey map we built. Talked to a lot of customers as they're looking into migrating into VCF. And a lot of time, when we start this conversation, customer really asks, like, where would I start? Is there any blueprint that might help me or my teams, a lot of different teams within an organization to start looking into this, and what are my options in order to get to VCF? So, we can talk about the options, but really start with the journey in the sense like, where would I even start? And so after having conversation with few customers and learning about their journey, I built this roadmap, might help other customers also. And as any migration plan or journey plan you have to assess where you are, and that's really where this journey also starts. You have to assess where you are in the sense what you have in the inventory of your environment today. You can even start higher level, what your environment is really built of. Do you have multiple site? You have single site? How many cluster? What kind of resources you use within those clusters? Then, of course, inventory, what kind of VMs do you have? What kind of applications they make? How they communicate with each other? Having a map of assessment of your current environment helps make this migration journey successful. And within VCF, there are multiple tools that are available to you to help you assess your current environment. Tools like VCF operations or VCF network operation, which is a new brand for VRNI, VRNI, vRealize Network Insight. And these products will provide you information of your current environment. And if you are migrating into a new environment, then also resources over there, if you have enough resources, all the capabilities available on the other side or not.
So stepping through that, that initial assessment discovery, you talk about, the using what we call VRNI, Realize Network Insight. That's a network-based discovery tool. So what is that detecting? Is that just NetFlow layer 4, and then I'm working to discover application connections? Is that like helping me map stuff? What is that getting me in terms of resource demand or need? What all do I start with that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So with VCF Network Ops, or aka Verni, you're right. It has a capability to do the check the network flows, but if that's not the only way it can do the mapping, there are other ways. Just by and you can pick and choose these different options. Maybe VM name, if you're religious about your naming convention and in your organization and have really good and appropriate names, you can do discovery through that or mapping through that naming convention. Or if you want to do it by cluster, all the virtual machines within a cluster or by particular network, there are different options available to you over there. The beauty about the net flows are you also get the dependencies. So if I have an application and it is dependent on maybe other application or my common services, I'll be able to see that through the flow, and will be able to determine that, in order for me to migrate this particular application, if I'm doing migration in waves, might want also consider migrating the dependent applications or having a way, maybe a L2 extension so that it can talk back.
Okay, so like let's say I've got 3 database groups I want to migrate or 3 application groups I want to migrate. I can see that, okay, there's a common, they're all hitting port 53 to this other VM. Okay, they all have a common DNS dependency. Or it looks like, you might discover that an extra application is using that load balancer. Maybe you need to figure out a better strategy there. Now, before we go down this path, what is the scale that going through like this level of analysis works? Like, is there a certain number of networks or a certain number of VMs where I step away? Because there are very simple means to migrate things. There's just, you fire vSphere replication and you fail over, or you just do vMotion. If I've got a dozen VMs, I'm obviously not going to sit here and do a giant assessment. I'm just going to go yeet those things somewhere. But what are the scale points to where you see that customers need to take this more methodical and start looking at using all the tools and getting a better understanding?
Yeah, if you're a very small environment, you're right. You it might be worth doing a lift and shift. That these are the or and we see that a lot in maybe consolidation use cases. Customer might have a small 5 or 6 different sites, or even couple sites, and this is a new. They're migrating to VCF. They're looking into that, and why not consolidate all in one place, and that way help with the resources and also with the focus. So in those scenarios it makes sense to go ahead and do the lift and shift, because the environment might not be big enough. But even in that case, I would still consider running the VCF just to make sure that you have checked all your boxes, and there are no independent or some even ports wise and stuff like that. There are no dependencies that you might want to open on the other side for the application to work properly, because maybe the firewalling on the new site might be different, so you don't want to break them even on the as you're migrating them.
So if I'm
So
really, like, I guess, like listening to the networking side, especially the networking side becomes important if I'm migrating to another site or at least another area where BGP is popping out differently and I've got separate announcements. If I'm just moving from one rack at a data center to another, that's more of a consolidation play. It might be a little simpler, although I might still want to go through this just to better understand what I'm doing. Now, we've talked a bit about networking. What about the other resources, about compute, about storage? How do we map or optimize those out? How do we prepare those for moving?
Yeah, exactly. Say, VCF operations will help you with that. It gives you a really good picture of your current resource allocation. How much resources you do have on certain sites, and how they're allocated within the virtual machines. If you're doing thin provision, thick provisioning, depending on that, get a nice heat map on all those information, so you can plan better if you were to migrate to a new site, that you will have resources, and you're not going to run out of those kind of information or resources on the other side. Same with even like IP addresses range if you were doing network and stuff. So VCF Ops gives you a nice picture on your memory utilization, your CPU utilization, your storage, what kind of storage do you have, so you can either plan to upgrade or migrate to a different storage, or make sure that you have similar storage on the other side.
Well, and I like that thing you talked about utilization, because I know a lot of people when they're looking at migrations, they're looking at replatforms. They looked at allocations.
Hmm.
And we live in the virtual world where we overcommit things. And so this seems like it might be an opportune time to, right size some of those migrations, maybe adjust some of those or test those out. On the storage side, I remember one time someone doing a thick on thick on thick, and then they moved to thin on thin, and they discovered they only needed, 1/5 as much storage. So, as part of that assessment, I guess it's good that you've got these tools that are known. I know Ops is known for helping with that consolidation. So,
Yeah, really important first step to understand what you have, what you're planning to migrate within that,
Yeah.
and then the next step, once you understand your environment, both source and destination, is the planning of that. And in my experience, this is the part that takes the most time, and as it should, because migrating, with the tools we have available, it's quick and easy, but the planning aspect is the one that need time, that need collaboration between teams, and we really have to make sure that we do this right.
Well,
Yeah.
John usually says it's YOLO, right, John? I don't.
yell YOLO in the data center and hit the emotion and go out to lunch.
Yeah.
Or start up the blender. That's generally my migration method. But
One interesting thing I'd like to point out in this diagram, because we're going to get to this topic a little bit later, is there are two sites here, the left-hand site and the right-hand site, the existing and the VCF. And this assess and plan phase, if you have a sound disaster recovery plan in place, you've probably done a lot of this already.
Hmm.
And what we're doing is changing the nature of the two sites. So this is very useful work for migration, for assessment, for consolidation, for disaster recovery too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
well, and like let's walk through what are some of the homework you have to do for that live recovery or that SRM environment that you also would be duplicative here and help you in terms of understanding dependencies or whatever that is.
Almost the same thing. I mean, if figuring out what needs to fail over for a disaster is part of the assess and plan phase that you should have done already. Now, no, it might be like, hey, everything goes, I hit the door. I think that was your analogy earlier, John. Or
Yeah.
I've gone through and I've built a organization where I know that this application takes these pieces with it, and here's how it's going to run in the other data center. If I've already thought through some of those assess and plan stages for my disaster recovery readiness, I'm halfway there to migrating to VCF.
Yeah. And much like Live Recovery or SRM, back in the day, like when you're planning for this and you're designing it, you then get the ability to test it as well. And I know we'll talk more about that later, but that's definitely also part of the planning phase, is making sure it works.
Yes, and same within the planning phase. With VCF provides a lot of different tools to do the planning of the migration, and these tools might again, network operation. VCF network operation is one of them, and HCX also has a feature called mobility groups that you can that will help you do the planning itself. And within the VCF Network Ops, there actually a new feature that recently was launched, and it is solely built for planning migration. And it gives you step-by-step instructions on once you do the assessment about your environment, that this is what the environment is made of, and how you want to do the migration itself. Do you want to do migration in lift and shift form, or you want to do migration in different waves? And all these, the tool will help you step by step to build the migration plan.
Very good. Well, let's move on to secure.
Yeah, secure is very important piece of it, and it is multiple prong, right? So there is no one and done with security. Security needs to be happening from every aspect, and things like, you know, I'm doing the migration. I have firewall, and I might need to talk to and communicate with my firewall team to make sure that security posture is also available on the destination side. And this happens before I do the migration, right? You don't want to move the virtual machine and do the security or, you know, firewalling afterwards. So there are certain prerequisite, so security is with firewall is one of them. You have to make sure that the secure whatever posture you have, either, you know, similar or better posture should be available on the destination before you do the migration. So that's one aspect of it. And then other aspect of the security pieces are, um, how do I want to do the migration? This network I might build between two sites, you know, want to make sure that is secure. And HCX gives you, you know, provide you um, an option to build this network IPsec tunnel between two sites, and can also do a L2 extension on top of it, which is an optional feature available for you. But if you like, you can also encrypt this IP tunnel. So if you were to use the network over internet, right, it's going to the public domain, you want to make sure that everything is encrypted. Or, you know, so that's one piece of it. And other pieces I've seen in customer side are like, my virtual machine itself is encrypted. Would I be able to migrate that? And HCX can help you with that. It can migrate your encrypted virtual machines, um, or, you know, if you were to use NSX, for example, on the source side, and you have created certain tags, and doing your security posture via NSX tags, which are attached to the virtual machine, HCX can also move those tags as they migrate the virtual machine. So there are, you know, you have to see this from multiple sides. You have to work with different teams to make sure that security is front and center.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially, yeah, I forget that it used to be there were some difficulties sometimes replicating encrypted VMs, but being able to do that in such a way, and I do like that thing on using the tags for security postures, so that way you don't have to go rebuild all your security rules or potentially have people manually doing that, which is always where you end up with gaps in ACLs, either in too open and permissive, or forgetting and then things break. And this also brings back what when Mike was saying earlier about, these are the kinds of things that you also have to think about for DR, because you need to think about your external firewall rules for DR to work. And so if your DR
Yeah.
plan works, then you've already mapped what needs to work at the secondary site here.
Absolutely. And then listen, we've talked about assessing it. We've talked about planning. We've talked about secure. And then we've been burying the lead here a little bit for the topic of this conversation, which is the migration. And there's many ways to migrate, but I want to focus on the three that get folks to VCF. Starting with HCX, I would love to just talk a little bit about what that looks like from your perspective, Puneet. Like, what exactly do we need to know about using HCX when it comes to migrating?
Yeah, absolutely. So HCX is part of your VCF bundle, so it comes with it. Yeah, and it is, if I have to do an elevator pitch on this, it's a product that is built for migration. So migrating workload is the number one, or the main use case for this product. It's not like a secondary use case, and you can migrate your workloads from vSphere based hypervisor or KVM or Hyper-V into VCF, vSphere. And it's been, the product is very mature. It's been out for many years. Last year, we in VMware Explorer in Vegas, we announced over 1 million virtual machine migrations happened in production environment from customer side. So, it's million plus now, and very mature product, and it basically, as I mentioned, migrate into VCF. Now, this VCF could be running on premises, or this VCF could be running in public cloud, like Azure VMware solution, or Google VMware Cloud solution, or Oracle VMware solution. And so many partners we have that provide this VCF as a service. You can migrate anywhere using the HCX. And you can do it. It provides you a different type of migration type. On most of them, or all of them except one, you can do it without deploying any agents on your virtual machine, and you can, and we leverage it. We leverage the vMotion technology underneath it. So these are non-disruptive migration that the vMotion you're familiar with. You can do it, but you can do it in bulk. You can do up to 1,000 virtual machines.
Well, and that bulk becomes important because one of the historic challenges I remember with doing large scale vMotions is often I would get a specific time window to do those vMotions. You know, I had some cab who I didn't necessarily enjoy the pleasure of talking to who would say, well, we'll give you 2 hours to do this cutover, this migration. It's like, well, since I've got to move data and I've got a storage piece, that's always kind of a giant, like, how long is the storage vMotion going to take? I don't know. How much data you got? Well, how quick can it go? Well, how much network have you got? Like, every time they asked, they would try to pin me down on how fast something would happen. I would just like ask 3 more questions back. And being able to pre-stage and kind of pre-schedule and coordinate those failovers rather than them just happen when they happen, which I mean, generally I didn't care about because I generally wasn't having any impacts, but that is something that, becomes a problem of scale in a very different way of you can't get a change control window necessarily big enough to move all those things at once, or the lack of definitive knowledge of when that is. And literally your option is break a vMotion halfway and have half the VM stranded because your migration window closed. Like having some of these capabilities for coordination and scheduling and pre-staging the data, like this is big.
Yeah, absolutely. What we have done in with and in this slide we talk about this a little bit. There are different type of migration types. It shows under blue, and one of them is replication assisted vMotion, and basically that's exactly what we do. You start the RAV, or replicate assisted vMotion, now, and it will actually replicate all your storage first, and whenever is your maintenance window that you have scheduled for, it will wait until then, do the delta sync every 3 to 4 hours to make sure it's up to date, and whenever is the cutoff, might be a week from now, or Saturday night, or during your maintenance window, it'll do the final delta sync then, and do the cutover. So it makes it very easy. And with the vMotion, of course, you usually do 1-2 virtual machine at a time, but with bulk or RAV, you can do these simultaneously in thousands of virtual machine at a time. But in this slide, let me quickly go over a little bit. The reason we were able to do all this is because within HCX, we provide 2 different really functionalities. One is the network pipeline that you need to do the migration itself from site A to site B, and then the second one is the different type of migration depending on your use cases. And that network piece is very valuable because within few clicks, you can build this IPsec tunnel, and you can do more optimization on top of it with network engineering, can do L2 extension, WAN optimization. All these different options are available for you to enable on top of it, depending on your use case. But building that pipeline is really core, and a lot of customer uses them, and it can happen on any network. You can, as I mentioned, can do over private network or public network. You have a VPN, you can between site, you can utilize that. If you are moving to maybe a public cloud and you have a direct connect or equivalent, and you can utilize those pipes. So however is your base connectivity is, we can build our IPsec tunnel on top of it, encrypt it, make sure it's secure, and also make sure it's fast by doing some WAN optimization and a lot of other features that are available.
Is this pipeline something that you build for the purposes of the migration, and then when you're done, you no longer have it, or is this just an open pipeline?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an open pipeline. A lot of customers do use it, because as I mentioned, can provide the L2 extension. So make the connectivity between two sites. Because in very large cases, we have seen that these migration take long time. Few years in certain cases. Not and the reason behind it, it's just a very large environment, and there are a lot of workloads, and there are different timelines for individual application or workload to be migrated, and that's just how customer have decided or planned their migration. So in those scenarios, these virtual or application you might have migrated on the new site, they still need to connect to their common services, and you can continue to use these L2 pipelines, L2 extensions to make that communication. One thing we have learned over time is, if you are let's say planning your migrations and in waves, and you have with the help of VCF network operations, you have identified that certain application of VM might be very chatty. We do advise to maybe we learned this, that it's better to maybe migrate those virtual machine first and do the switchover of the networks, or do it last and do the switchover. So not utilizing that L2 extension too heavily. There's nothing wrong with it, but it just increases the lag time a little bit, as you can imagine, the physics. But so those are the things we have learned over time, and customer try to utilize those.
Nice. Well, in interest of time, and for those listening, we're going to share on the show notes some of these slides that were presented in this original webinar, but also in this this presentation. Puneet's done a great job of diving very deep on the various use cases, in addition to just breaking down the entire architecture and the various migration options. But in interest of time, I'd love to pivot a little bit and start talking about what this looks like if we're actually using VCF Import.
Yeah, so that's another tool that you could use. So HCX was one of them. Now the second, pivoting to VCF Import. VCF Import was launched in VCF 5.2. It's fairly new, and we are very excited about this new technology. And what it does is, so far we talked about migrating the virtual machine from one environment to another. But what if I have a vSphere, which I'd like to pull the whole vSphere within the VCF environment? And that's what VCF Import enables you to do. So you have, you deploy maybe a new VCF and environment next to where your current is, and the vCenter you have, you can bring that vCenter itself within the SDDC manager, so it will recognize that, and there will be a sync process, and the process will happen, and end of the day you will get this current vSphere cluster into your VCF environment. And there are two ways of doing it. So if you're familiar with VCF environment, we have a management cluster and a compute, and so that's why this VCF import have two different places where you can, or two different phases. One is the, as you can see on the slide, is the convert, and that's the one you'll use if you were to convert your current vSphere environment into a management environment. And then the second one is the import, and import is what you will use if you're migrating your vSphere into a workload environment. As I said, new technology. Currently, it is available only in CLI. We're working on the UI piece of it, and but it's very simple to use. And there are I put on some of the code snapshot on the website on the PowerPoint to show you how easy it is and what kind of attribute it's taken to in order to run this.
Yeah, no, I think VCF Import is definitely going to be wildly popular moving forward. So, Mike, you've been working with VMware Live Recovery for a while, and this is also a migration option, which is going to be very different, in my opinion, from the two that we've already discussed. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what it looks like using, and I've always said that, like, even from the days of early Site Recovery Manager, I've always felt like the tool was improperly named, because it does a lot more than it sounds so reactive, Site Recovery Manager. But there's a planning, there's the ability to proactively move these things. And so I always felt like it was never a good name to, but that being said, tell me how we can actually use Live Recovery for a migration.
Sure. It's one of the possible use cases of your disaster recovery tool. And, obviously you want to have a protection in place should an unforeseen disaster, hit your environment. But all of the infrastructure that's in place to do that, and if you're, and I'm going to make the assumption that you're, good about practices, is the two sites, the current site and the other site, need to be well understood. The workloads need to be set up, and disaster avoidance is obviously the sort of in between it. That's a proactive, premeditated failover when you have time to deal with an emergency. But in this case, just moving workloads from A to B, we know we got vMotion, we've got vSphere replication, we've got HCX migration. There's a number of ways of doing this, but we can also just get the data to the other side and orchestrate a planned failover, a planned migration. The thing with migrations is they're typically one direction. With a DR tool, you do have the luxury of going back and forth a little bit under orchestration control. So Site Recovery Manager is actually the orchestrator. And that's going to let you take your planning and assessing and all of the steps that we did earlier in trying to understand the migration and essentially codify that into the orchestration capabilities. All right. John was saying earlier about, getting partway through a vMotion and having to stop because your window closes. Well, if you're using something underneath like vSphere replication, you can dial in how frequently that syncs up and how far along it is, so you know that at this point, I'm only, 10 minutes away from full sync, for example, or maybe a half an hour from full sync. This is a good time to take that outage, take that failover window. That's the one caveat I want to point out, is using your recovery tool, all right, is a recovery. It's a failover. There will be an outage on the production site and a resumption on the new site, but controlling that window in a proactive, premeditated migration scenario is something you could do reasonably on the weekend. Now, the one thing that I really like about using your recovery tool, and you mentioned this earlier, was the testing capabilities. Is I can organize a set of VMs and applications, say, I think these need to move together. Let me bundle them up into a protection group. Let me put them into an orchestration plan, and let me just non-disruptively take those to the other site and see if they work. If everything looks good over there, I haven't disrupted my current production. If everything looks good at the new site, I'm 9/10 of the way to putting them there permanently. And so, but if something's not right, let's say there's a service back at the original site or some networking that I didn't get right or some
dependency,
resource,
sure. Yeah.
Then I can basically say, cancel the plan. Let me go figure this out. Let me go back to assess and plan and all of the other steps and run through it again. And when I'm happy with the test, results, which I can iterate over, then I can say, I think this workload that I've identified can be proactively migrated with our recovery tool with a very short outage window. But you will
now you're just gonna make me look bad, because I always tell the cab, like, no one knows. You're actually gonna know how long it's gonna take. You're making a liar out of me. I don't like it.
no, you're only going to know if you're paying attention, and that's a clue here, because if you look in the logs, you look in the data, you can see that I've been replicating these changes every 15 minutes, every hour, whatever, and they're only taking on the order of this much time. So unless something really changes in your production environment at the moment you try to pull, throw the switch, you're not going to be horribly surprised.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be able to go and say, I've set this replication schedule up, and it's hitting my SLAs, and everything's good. I know that in 15 minutes I can be in sync. So my outage window is only going to be a little bit more than that. I got to power down, sync, power up. It might be a few minutes more than that. And so I'm not making a liar out of you. I'm making a more diligent operator out of our customers.
Fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
So is VMware Live Site Recovery a replication engine, or is it using other tools for that?
So the interesting thing, the vSphere replication is built into vSphere, and that comes with existing vSphere and VCF environments. And that's one of the data movement mechanisms, and that's what we're kind of talking about here. There's some other ways to get the data from A to B, but the orchestration of what to do at the secondary site, at the new location, is what Live Site Recovery, the orchestrator, is doing for you. And that's where you're going to build in the protection groups and the recovery plans from all that assessment and planning that you did early on in this podcast. You're going to codify that into your protection groups and recovery plans and test those out. And that's the orchestration piece. That's VMware Live Site Recovery. And that's going to help you test. And if you get it over to the other site and you need to fail it back, you can. Now, the other thing that's interesting is these are not mutually exclusive approaches. So the current site and the new site might be extended with HCX and NSX and a number of other things. And so there is, as Puneet was saying, you might have some chatty applications, or maybe you don't. But the two sites might be connected operationally. But from a failover perspective, we're going to get the data to the other site and bring it up there running. Now, if it has to talk back to the current site for a period of time, that's going to be part of the assessment and planning you've got to come through. There's a lot of things that you'll discover in going through this. So like I said, they don't have to be mutually exclusive approaches. And for customers with hundreds of virtual machines and highly dependent applications, this might be yet another way to bring a whole set of those over, conveniently on weekend outages, for example.
Okay. So walk me through the process of running a recovery plan then, if I was going to use VMware Live Site Recovery.
So the recovery plans sit in the orchestrator. They basically have an inventory of the protection groups, which are the applications that you've assessed and planned together. And there's an orderly process that's basically going to attempt the final synchronization of data, because there is background replication going on. So you see the synchronized replication. Now, if we're failing over virtual machines and the networking we don't want two of the same thing running. So we're going to power off the virtual machines at the current site. This is the outage I mentioned. All right. And then if there's any last little change of data that happened now that they're quiet, we'll want to get that over, and then basically go through our recovery plan, which is a nice orderly set of steps. This protection group, this VM, this order, make these customizations. Think of it as your run book that you can work through and codify and capture and validate before you actually press the button for final migration. All right. And that's where when you're running through the recovery plan, you want to get to that last bullet on this slide where the VMs are being powered on at the new site with the latest data and fully synchronized with the copy that they just came from. And so it's a fairly orderly process of powering down and powering up your virtual machines under orchestration control with a number of other things that you can manage in there that tie into, back on that one slide we were talking about the setting up, the planning and assessing and securing. The networking might be different at the two sites. They might be connected. They might have different outbound networking. All of those subtleties have to be taken into account when a virtual machine suddenly moves from A to B. You know, we can get it.
Having the customization as that fallback of helping with those changes or account for those things is nice.
Yeah.
And you know, the more I look at all these different steps here, the more I realize, you know, you really just need everything to be a VM, because trying to do all of this without virtualization is a common platform to throw these things around.
Right.
It's something I think we take for granted, but you know, this is something that, you know, HCX also I think can help convert physical into virtual, and that maybe part of your steps, you know, of identifying is like the scope of migrations when it involves, you know, 36 simultaneous running copies of CP and robocopy or whatever barbaric thing you're still doing in the physical world. This just looks so simple, and it's a reminder of like, we got to bring everything in scope here.
Well, I think the VCF private cloud stack is a great place to virtualize everything if you haven't already.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to play a little devil's advocate here. I don't think there is a right answer, but I want to put this out to both Puneet and to Mike here. So it seems to me if using VMware Live Recovery, there is going to be an time where I power off my virtual machines. It seems like an outage that maybe some companies would not want to have an outage and have some non-disruptive way. Is there, I think the answer, as I said, is going to be different for various companies, but why wouldn't I just always go with the non-disruptive way of, say, HCX? What would be some of the reasons not to?
So I would say not every virtual machine is created equal. So if I was looking at my inventory, when I was doing the assess and planning stage, I might come back and say 20-30% of these workloads, we really don't want to take an outage. We want them to move over as quickly as possible. And so we're going to go through the steps to extend the networks and set up the pieces and kind of do all of the validation that we can ahead of time to make that work. But then there's going to be some workloads you can be like, bring those over by Monday. We don't need to necessarily handle them with all of the other scheduling and timing and network extensions. We just need to get the data to the other side and power them on, and we can take the outage. And so I think that, not, like I said, not every application workload is the same, needs the same treatment. So this gives you basically an option for, it's the 80-20 rule, the 20-80 rule, whatever you want to play it. I think that there's definitely an opportunity to say critical infrastructure, let's do it live. Other infrastructures, let's get it so that we're out for an hour and just schedule the maintenance. I see those messages come through in our own business, once a week. It's like, hey, don't work Saturday morning between 9 and 11. And I'm like, wasn't planning on it.
Yeah.
We have seen the similar approach. During the assessment and planning, there are certain crown jewels application. You want them migrated without any disruption. You don't want to change IP addresses. You don't want to change MAC addresses. You want the network to look exactly the same, and you can utilize HCX definitely to do that. And for the some other application, what I've also seen, it's not you're doing a migration. You are upgrading to latest and greatest, and this is also an opportunity to do things you might not have done before, or they've been pending for a very long time. For example, you might want to upgrade the hardware version. You might want to upgrade the VM tools in it. You might want to change it to a different network and do re-IP these applications. So all these kind of this migration is bringing opportunity to make things better also at the same time. And customers do utilize that reboot functionality to get all these different aspects of a virtual machine done at the same time while they're doing the migration. So that's why that planning and assessment phases are so important, because you can wrinkle out all these during that time.
Yeah,
I like that. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I'm going to throw one more thing out there. So I'm a little selfish on this one because I focus on customers protecting their virtualized environments. And if you have tools like VLR in place, you're setting up a new site, get super comfortable with failing workloads over and into and out of that. Because even if that's not your final migration, you might take a few over there just as an example. Once you migrate to the new site, you're going to want your DR solution to be rock solid too. So you kind of get, two birds, one stone, or three birds, two stones.
You can just flip it around.
I don't know.
Yeah, you flip it around and it's ready to go back.
Yeah, I try to convince customers to test early and often and regularly. And sometimes there's a side effect. It's like, hey, I tested this. The workload looks fine. I'm like, well, press the button and fail it over. You're done.
Yeah. That's always the scary part. It's easy to test and plan, but boy, once it's live, it's a different experience, isn't it? Yeah. All right, gentlemen, that was good. One thing I do want to mention, for those that are in the world of VCF, you're probably familiar with this. You may have already seen it out there. We've had one for previous versions, but there's a new VMware Cloud Foundation private cloud poster. Our good friend Anton April just updated it, so pretty cool. There's a link below here. I'll also leave a link in the show notes, but. This is definitely, and it even identifies all the various options. It's got HCX on there. We can zoom in and see, and it also has VMware Live Recovery. Mike, have you seen this poster?
I have, and in that upper left corner, there's actually migrate and import, and I think greenfield. So depending on how you're getting to your new VCF environment, we just talked about a couple of those pathways.
Yeah, very nice. That's a good point. Yeah, really cool poster, and it has all those options on there. So while you're doing your VCF planning, just pull out the poster, and I'm sure it'll help you. Very nice, very nice. Well, Puneet, thanks for joining us for the very first time on Virtually Speaking. Mike, thanks for coming back. Open invitation to both of you. This has been a good conversation. Again, links in the show notes to all of the documentation that we discussed on this podcast. But yeah, guys, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks a lot.